Welcome to Albion TV presents the AO Daily Show, your source of real news in an world, keeping you up to date on the latest news, events, and the great community of Albion Online. Today is Tuesday, the 26th of November, and I am your host, Shozen. And with me today and streaming today is my co-host, Bogul. How you doing today, Bogul?
Hello. I'm doing okay. I'm already aware some of the action of today's show will take place in one of the Newbie cities, in one of the crosses. But why don't you talk about what today's show is about, Chosen?
Oh, what is today's show about? Okay, so on Friday, I did an interview with a new player named Cable, who had only been playing for about 6 days, Bogle. And
6 days. Okay.
6, maybe 7 days at that point. But something in that conversation kind of rang out more than anything else. And that was that he felt the game was too easy and he had yet to seemingly leave much of the blue zone. It sounded like he had gone to the yellow zone once or twice, but I didn't get the feeling like he was involved in the PvP in any way yet. And he felt it was just too easy.
Wait. So today we're just going to tell everybody how hard Albion is?
No. Well, yes, we are. We're going to talk. I think we're going to talk more about misconceptions newbies have, or I don't want to use newbies, newer players have, players getting hung up. Where along the chain between the tutorial and fighting do players get hung up? Where are the stop gaps that really slow down progress? And how can we, as like veterans, help players get to the end faster? And then I guess even we'll look at a little bit how even SBI could facilitate that, because we have recently started to hear rumblings, the very beginnings of a patch that might rework like the economy, royals, all these kinds of things, way after Queen. They're like, what's after Q? R? What are they going to call Ronaldo? Ronaldo. I'm going to call it Ronaldo from now on. When Ronaldo comes out,
something with like English lore or something. We had Merlin before. We had Percival before. We had
Reginald.
Maybe.
Or we could just call it Regis. The Regis patch. I like the Regis
Rex?
Patch.
Like Queen, King, Rex the Red.
Yeah.
Do we have, talking about Rex the Red, who is a protagonist in the recent Outlands report we saw, do we have any official news before we start?
Could just be the Roy. Oh, Bogle.
Huh?
Did we just missed the most obvious one ever? Royal.
I think there's something missing if you just call it Royal.
Well, I mean, it is the Royals update, right? It's the one that would be updating the Royals. It would be R for the Royals. And all right.
Are there any news today, Shozen, other than
today?
Yeah.
New today?
Yes.
No.
Okay. So just newbie things.
Newbie stuff.
Decided that newbie or Tuesdays is sort of our newbie Tuesday, and we haven't quite figured out how to optimally do the show yet. So we're trying a bunch of things in that regard. And when we prepared today's show, you said, dude, I had this conversation on Friday, and there are some things I really want to talk about. And first explain, you already said it, that you talked to a new player, but secondly, talk a little bit about how you came from having this conversation to today's show.
Well, or how I got from
other than spending time. I mean, what was the reason why?
When I talked to him, a couple of things, like I said, they popped out. And one, I had some questions for you guys. Is Albion too soft?
Okay.
Does it hold your hand too long? And do the blue zones help or hinder the new player experience? Because the question I hear more than any other question ever is, where do I make T4? And I wonder at this point, and
Mhm.
this is very early in this conversation to say it, because this is like the hypothesis that I have going forward. Should we just go from the tutorial zones to the royal cities? Or
Mhm.
are those crossroads a necessary midpoint between, or are they a holdup? Because from a royal city, you could conceivably get to the blue, the yellow, and even one entrance to the red.
Mhm.
But do those crossroads help or hinder at this point? Like,
Interesting. Okay.
and if we could, that's the question that's just going to keep coming back as we go through this episode, is do they help or hinder? And what other options are there, and how, with our current system, how can we help players get out of there? Because that's the scary part, is how bad is it if you stay there a week? That's my concern. Like, I talked to some of the mods, Bogle, and one of the things they came up was that the yellow zones are what they consider like the great sifting. Like, if you make it through here, you can stay. Like, if you make it through yellow, you're gonna stay.
Mhm.
But if you get stuck in the blue and the yellow, eventually that's where your game ends. You
Right,
end there.
right.
That's the place where people end. They don't stop when they go from red to black and see that it's so much harder when they go to black. They don't stop there. That's not where they stop. They
Mhm.
don't stop when they get to, oh my god, GVGing is what's left for me. They don't stop there.
Mhm.
But this really early stage of, you're gonna have to PvP.
So,
Yeah.
I think I got your point
And I
there.
wonder if we, I wonder if we could introduce, like, you don't want people to get used to not PvPing, right? You want to
Mm,
introduce them to that aspect of the game as easy as soon as possible, right? Like,
in
that
the
was one of the
context
things
of
that.
Albion, I'd have to agree.
Mhm.
And with the general big scale idea of in games general, there's a bunch of people who don't like to PvP and they don't have to, and they should never ever have to if they don't want to. But in the context of Albion Online, that is in the late game so much focused around these big groups having conflicts and trying to fight off other people around their territory, or even getting to the point where you conquer territory for yourself and your group. There I see the issue when you just don't want to PvP. There are a
True,
few niches
100%.
where you can enjoy that sort of gameplay, but Albion does have a large PvP element. I have to give it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's a very important part of the game, and I when I talk to new players, what I always try to say is, learn to die, learn to accept death, learn to go out and get into a fight and lose. I mean, it's the first achievement in Albion, right? It's the welcome to Albion achievement, if
If you
you will,
die,
right?
yeah.
If you die, it says welcome to Albion.
Hmm.
I I love the idea of anything we can do to encourage a player to understand that death isn't the end of the game. Death is just part of the cycle. And every time you learn, go out in something worth, like, that you can lose, engage in PvP, win or lose. It doesn't matter. Um,
What
recently, I
you
go ahead.
mentioned the word cycle there. What is the cycle that you think
Well,
Albion
there's a
has?
number of Albion has a number of cycles, right? That's what Albion has. It has a cyclical gameplay.
Hmm.
That's how Albion's economy works. That's how the gameplay works with, like, ownership of things. It very much is, like, you have, like, all content in Albion is player created, right? From the goods to the interactions.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I worry that sometimes we insulate early on some of the players from that interaction, and we need to introduce it to them earlier. Like, we have the crafting cycle, which is, you gather it, you refine it, you craft it, it gets used, it gets destroyed.
Hmm.
That's the crafting cycle. And the players themselves are the PvE cycle, like, is players. We represent, to most players, the environment. And yes, technically we are PvP, but in PvP often it's very much like, you go out to choose just to see who's the best. That's PvP. That's like a competition. But in our game, it's not even just about the competition, it's about your engagement with the world. people go out and try to engage with each other because that's the best reward in the game, is to kill another player, because they have way more stuff worth gaining than you could get from grinding NPCs forever. They are the part of the environment you want to get to.
Right.
Like,
I suppose, yeah.
like whether it's in GVGs, ZVZs, or ganking, the best rewards, the best pinatas in this game, the thing that you're going to get the most economic rewards from taking down, are generally our other players. Yes, you have the rare aspects or the world bosses that are comparable to a good player, but right away you can drop if you drop an 8-2 player.
Yeah, well, that's the tricky part, right? Dropping.
You're not going to do that. You're not going to do that as a new player.
But yeah.
But early on, learning that the player interaction is everything in a way, I worry that the early experience of the game. Well, here's what I'll look at. The early experience of the game is you come off the tutorial, which is fantastic, by the way. Can I just say, I've done that tutorial now 6 times and I love it. I think it's awesome and it's very cool. I love that. Then you get off the boat and you go to the crossroads, right? Yep. And the crossroads really feels like it's our old tutorial. Like it's left over from when the tutorial kind of took place there. And from there, you kind of just repeat the same game function that you already had back on the tutorial. You go forward, you gather resources, you bring them back, and you craft. But there's one part of this world that is completely different than every other place out in the world. When you leave this area, you're safe. And all the players around you are going after the same things. You're gathering next to players. You're hanging out with players. The players represent no fear to you. Like there's no.
Is that an issue? That is like the second you step into the world that you'd need to be afraid. Is that an issue? I don't think.
I don't know if afraid is the right word, but aware. Like, and I wonder if the next step, and I'm just postulating here, if the next step was to go out into some place where it showed you that everything in the world was player run, because we have no other places besides these crossroads that have these NPC buildings, right? Like these NPC buildings are kind of unique to the tutorial environment than the crossroads.
In the way that they are sort of never running out of food, and that you can craft there for free. In that sense, yes, but in terms of what you can do there, they're just the lower version of the quote unquote higher tier buildings. So I give me more examples as to how you want to progress this, because so far,
well, it's unclear at this point. What I'm concerned about is the more the outcomes. Do you know what I mean? Like when I hear that players get stuck in the blue zones too long and then they transition to yellow zones and that's where they quit the game, I wonder if we gave them that instructions earlier, like how to engage in the world earlier, than let them getting stagnant in the blue zones or the yellow zones, and introduce them to the world that is completely created by players earlier by like dropping them off in the city and then having, say, the city, attached to a blue zone,
I feel like you need
yellow zone, and red zone.
I feel like you need to have a certain area that is just safe for you to try a different thing, to even figure out, what is a bow, or what is cloth armor, or what does a sword do, or I can actually mount up, and there's different types of biomes, different types of resources. So I think this sort of extended tutorial is needed and fine, but yeah, the question of how fast you can transition to quote unquote the end of the tutorial, that I suppose you see the end of the tutorial being the royal cities, so Limehurst, Thetford, Fort Sterling, these cities.
Maybe that's what the case is. Maybe the tutorial does. Maybe it's not that the crossroads are the problem. Maybe it's that the tutorial ends before it gets you to the end where you need to end. Like maybe it's that we just don't explain well enough how temporary the crossroads should be, and that it's there's something else beyond. Because the most common question I hear, and maybe this is just part of the tutorial. Maybe this is part of the tutorial process, is where do I craft T4? And then that player is encouraged to use the global chat system to say, hey, where do I go? Right? Like that is their first interaction with other players in a lot of ways, right? Like more than just somebody who's competing for their nodes. Maybe that's like part of the tutorial. Maybe even asking is part of the learning process that needs to happen, because this game does, like I keep saying, so much of this is totally player driven. It's a sandbox doesn't need to be player driven. Like a sandbox can just be you going out and building things and just like Don't Starve can be considered kind of sandbox. You go out and you build your stuff. You can just do whatever you want or whatever. You can live there and have your own little survival kit. But Albion sandboxes, you really need to, in order to make your sandcastle, you really need other players to help you, get the mud, get the building pieces to bring it together so that you can have a real castle. And I wonder, how do you bring about players together? Yes. The player mud, the mud that brings the game together, that sticks us all together and forces us to cooperate so that we can, protect ourselves from each other.
I think there's two things that you wanted to bring up, and I'll just skip to one of them. Because you thought about reasons or things that you would see as a if you talk about this block where you are worried about people staying in the blue zones or in the crossroads too long, one thing you mentioned to me is that the player needs to discover sort of what they want to do, right? How they want to progress in terms of their gear or maybe in terms of their crafting. And one advice a lot of people give early on is just try everything. Try a bunch of things so you can figure out what sort of play style you like. Do you like, a ranged DPS? Do you like a tanky bruiser? Do you like a supportive or healer class? And there you are supposed to, pick a few things at tier 3, get them to tier 4, maybe get a bunch of things to tier 4, or maybe even everything to tier 4, and then just see what you like. And then the question is how far you go doing everything, right?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the double-edged swords there. Like that's advice I give. I give the advice of, learn everything up to T4 so you can use everything. And then pick something to specialize in. But I feel like I should tell people, like, long before that, get out of the crossroads. Don't spend all that time learning T4 in the safe zones necessarily. You can do it a lot faster if you level up a little bit, if you level up that process. And that kind of idea of doing it in a little bit higher area really works for almost everything in this game. Like if you want to level up everything, you want to really become a jack of all trades, which is kind of partially what you need to do. Level something up to the top first. Get really good at something first, and then it makes doing everything else easier. Once you get that high-end reverb, it makes doing PvE a lot easier, and it makes the faming process so much faster. Once you get to the point where you can start using fame credits.
Or maybe even just a tier 6 or tier 7 tool, right? If you have one single tool at
one tool higher,
then you have a different income flow as well. So yeah, figure out one specific thing and push that. But again, the question is sort of when do you start to specialize versus being a generalist? You mentioned it. What do you think? At the end of tier 4 before you go into tier 5 or?
Yeah, I think that once you hit T4 and you start to get everything together, before you start trying to build, I don't know, like every tool to D5, pick one thing. Go, I'm going to do this to a profitable level. And because even just being able to sell, like you kind of want to make that jump to the red zones as soon as you can for the experience and the profitability of just being able to get things there. The profitability of like the enchanted materials is so much greater than flats that you really should be focusing on that. Even if it's a situation where you have to go up to a higher tier to just get the T4s. Now, with T4, honestly, as a guy who's gathered everything a lot, on T4s, I still get the flats. On T4s, I'll get the flat and just burn through it as fast as possible because I hate being stuck there. And I've done it on so many different resets, and I've done it on a couple different characters, and I've done it on all the tools now. I I always just gather all the T4s. But when it comes to anything else, I go for just the specials. I just go for the shinies. I just try to level up using the shinies unless it's, something, you get really lucky with an aspect or something. Then you can get a ton of flat resources.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be a little bit more mindful about your progression level, right? You can't just go straight from the crossroads to the city without, being able to gather tier 4. So you have to spend some time in this area to progress. But I think as soon as you can get there and don't stick there too long, because the risk reward, which is a big deal in Albion, is greater there. So a lot of people like to compare things in terms of risk versus reward. And that's one of the basic building blocks of Albion, where the red zones and the black zones have higher fame bonuses. You get a special bonus if you kill mobs in the black or red zones. You get more resources as well, more silver. So you sort of have to figure out how you can get to the areas where it's quote unquote better sooner. And you had one more thing that I see on the notes that I think you wanted to talk about.
Which one?
Don't stay tier 4 forever. We talked about this. We said that it's okay to die and you have to figure out a path to that.
See, that's still right there. When you say that one, I feel like I haven't. That one is one of the most important lessons that I feel like gets just overlooked. And it was mentioned in chat earlier that it would be great if one of the early tutorial, like the end of the tutorial, even if the end of the last tutorial quest was to go out and engage in PvP and either get downed or die, so that you learn just what it's like. It says, the quest literally tells you, take what you're willing to lose. You're going to do something dangerous. You need to experience this. And it basically forces you into a PvP situation, either through, I think it would be best if it did it through the faction flagging system, so that it would up the number of targets that you would have and really direct you at like another city to get that experience. But I think that would be great with like a nice reward. Right now, we have the end where you get that, the mule. But something interesting,
sort of like equip a tier 4 0 set, nothing else, and then die and you get a tier 5 set or something.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Like right off the bat, you get a T5 set off of the black market, because I guarantee you there's enough on the black market to fund that. It would be interesting to see, just encouraging people earlier in the game to PvP. I feel like PvP is the most fun part of this game. When I went and did the event a couple of weeks ago with One of Us is in Viz, it was like this small family-friendly guild that is generally outnumbered by everybody they face. So in order to make life fun for them, they had to make the decision early on that dying wasn't a loss. Losing a fight didn't mean the night was over. They decided very early on to take out what they were able to lose, and the goal of the evening was always just to find content and to just fight, and then re-gear, go out and fight again. And by doing that, they ended up getting really good, because when the goal was to win, oftentimes they would, if they lost, that would be the end of the night. Everybody would just, like face palm and be, grumpy, and that's the end. You didn't win. But it was just to go out and get content, and then go out and get content again, get it again. They got much more enthusiastic even after a good loss. Like if it was a good loss, they were just like, yeah, we took down half of them. And when I was out with them, I saw like their shot caller die 4 times. And he regeared every time, came back pretty quickly because they learned how to, deal with loss. And it was just a continuation of the fight. Get out there and go do it again and do it again and do it again. And they fought some fights where they were outnumbered and some fights where they outnumbered the opponent. And against really good groups, against Shelty, like even though I have to say they outnumbered Shelty by a good bit, but they were able to play well against these guys and tower dive them and defeat them. And it was interesting to see like a smaller group have that mentality and do so well. And I want that to be something that everybody learns early on, that it's okay in this game to die and come back and try it again. That victory is not always the most important outcome. Sometimes just content in and of itself of going out there and getting the fight is worth it. Especially in a world where we have this cycle where you can craft another set. It's right. It's part of the cycle of life is go die, buy somebody else's set. They didn't make 7 sets to sell to 7 different people. They made 7 sets to sell 4 of them to you. At least that's the way I think of it.
So yeah, figuring out this path is pretty tricky. Figuring out, the balance of when are you comfortable enough to sort of dip your feet into the red water and sort of get out of the blue and safe zone is a tricky balance to find. And getting people to that is also tricky because for a lot of people, what constitutes quote unquote the best way to do it or the optimal way to do it is always a little different. So some people would say that, oh, you shouldn't go somewhere else because it's not efficient. Some people say, oh, you need to get that experience as soon as possible. So that I feel like we won't have the optimal advice here, to say what is best. Well, in my mind, it's just, try it sooner than later. I think that would be
I don't think there's no real best answer on this. For everybody, it is kind of like a personal choice. But what I do worry about is when I see somebody who says something like Cable said, it was too soft. And I expected something more. I came from something harder, more hardcore. And Albion really, bills itself as really hardcore. And I felt like it just held my hand for a week. And I'm like, well, you really held on to the skirt as long as you could. That your mom's skirts for a very long time. You don't need to stay there a week. You can go out earlier. But I understand there really isn't a push. There you can, if you want to. The game has a lot of content, Bogul, a whole lot of content, and you can stay in that T3 content for too long.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to see how much we can do, like just as a game, because I always look at what can be done better. What can make this just the transition to this cutthroat, absolutely very, very ruthless game. How can we transition people into it better? Not easier, not make it easier for them, just transition them into it better. Just, get them more encouraged into it because the game excels when you PvP. The game is amazing when you PvP. I'd love it if, like, part of the tutorial even said, go learn how to do the arena. Yes, it's going to take you half an hour to get in the queue, but make a friend who's a healer and it'll take you 5 minutes. Acknowledge that, acknowledge the fact that,
I don't think
grabbing a healer will get it done.
Writing down that in the tutorial makes any sense. But saying it, okay, why not?
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. So, anything else you guys talked about that you want to bring up in this situation, or do you think you covered the?
Well, I will say this.
perspective. Yeah.
We got a lot of people like Funstealer is very adamant that the Crossroads deserve to stay. They fulfill a role. They're useful. They do exactly what they're supposed to do. I'm crazy for thinking we need to kick people out of the Crossroads. I I don't think it's that we need to kick people out of the Crossroads. I'm saying, is there a better way to introduce people to PvP and to instigate PvP for newer players earlier and introduce them to the concept that Albion is about the cycle of life and death, and that to go out and what you're willing to lose? Because one of the other big things that we hear about all the time is the guy who's trying to make that transition from like the Crossroads to like a higher tier still does everything on their ox, that they never really learn to transition to do that until they die with it, until they die with their ox. And that first time they die with their ox is when they learn, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I really wish the game would tell you it's about dying with what you can afford to lose. I feel like that might be the one thing the game doesn't tell you and that you have to learn on your own that might be better for us to teach you.
I'm worried that if you just push people too much, then you basically suicide a bunch of noobs. So you basically have this lemmings effect where, all right, step A, get gear, step B, go here, step C, step over this cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And this cliff being a bunch of people in tier 6 or tier 7 who just wait for where the newbies need to quote unquote go complete their quest, and they just sit there and laugh. So that's a little bit of a thing I am worried about. But I can sort of get behind your idea of figuring out a way to make the transition a bit smoother. I'm a little bit in Funstealer's camp where I see the safe blue areas to just try stuff and sort of figure out how basic things work as a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there can always be ways to go about it at maybe pointing people a little more. I can see that. But one thing that I always say is the most important is talk and find friends. And
Mm-hmm.
that is another thing that is so important that I didn't want to, leave out. That
It
finding
is very
people to do
important.
stuff together with is in my mind almost like 4 times as important.
It's
whether
the
or
most
not
important thing.
you have tier 4 or not, or whatever you do.
The game, unless you know you want to be a solo player and you have a very high threshold for abuse, solo play it's the toughest way to go about Albion. Getting friends and doing things with other people introduces a lot more content and makes things more available to you. Like, that is one of my hopes in this next content update in Queen, is that we will see a lot more people just living in their zones like we used to see in betas. And so alliances and guilds will have entire zones that are safe, not because they are blue, but because they are full of their own people who live there, whether they're faming, gathering, what have you, crafting, doing whatever that is, just hanging out in their hideout, whatever it is. But people don't want to go there and attack you because they know that you have backup. Or if they do come to attack you, there's so much backup there that there'll be a warning system in place. You'll know that the battle is coming and you can use your skills to escape and get to the correct gear and come out and fight. But
Yeah. There is something to be said for wanting to do stuff solo, and there is a bunch of arguments to the fact that you don't always have to rely on other people to get stuff done, quote unquote. So hard balance to strike, but yeah, sometimes shoving a dude a little bit and say, hey, look, try this. Maybe so he stumbles in that sandbox a little bit and gets his face a little sandy. Why not? But in the end, I hope everybody arrives from the mini blue sandbox to the big black one, so we can all have a lot of fun there. And however long it will take you, it shouldn't be too long, I feel like. So if you're in that situation right now where you're trying to figure out where Fort Sterling is, open the map, go there. If the zone is red, that's maybe a little bit dangerous, but just try to make your way there if you can.
Yeah, that's the thing is I would love to see people just having just, even if it was just we encouraged them to go, like we told them as part of the game just to go to the city, like just another step, because I don't know if the right step in the tutorial should be /EN how do I craft T4, enter. Like I don't know if that should be the next step in the tutorial. Getting people to these very awesome player created cities, we should encourage them to get there, like just as soon as possible. That's the only thing. I mean, if we could, everything else, I mean, we can justify, we can say has a place. Yes, the crossroads serve a purpose. Yes, blue zones serve a purpose, but we need to get these people to these cities and ready to die, Bogle. But other than that, I mean, how much handholding is acceptable? How much discovery do we expect people to make on their own? How much of just clicking around on the UI do they need to do on their own? And us not introduce them to? It's that I was talking to another developer recently, and they were told at one point the CEO of their company made them all go, like all the developers go back through the tutorial and then say what was missing in the tutorial. And they were never able to get any good data because they already knew the answers to all the questions. And so they could never get like what would make it better for a new player, because they weren't new players themselves. And I worry oftentimes when we look at these things, we're looking at it from that perspective as what do veterans think new players need? And I really was just like astounded when I was like listening to Cable talk, because I couldn't understand how a new player would think that it was too soft. And the only reason I think he thought it was soft is because he spent a full straight week in the blue zones. And I'm like, how does someone stay in the blue zone for a week? And I didn't know how to ask that questions, like just how did you do that? And like, I knew the answer because he kept telling me is that he was doing everything. And I'm like, well, okay. But you kept coming back to the blue zones. You went to the city and you came back to the blue zones, and you're saying that it's just too soft. We hold your hand too long. How do we stop holding your hand if you can keep holding the hand too? Like, when do we forcibly let you go? Like, what is it that we could possibly do? I don't know. Well, like he one of the things he brought up, Bogle, and this was really bizarre for me, okay? Because I had never heard, like, okay, he said, how come I can't gather T3 in the black zones? You have T3 zones in the black zones, but I can't gather in them, like gather T3 resources. I explained to him the reason, that we have this idea that you have to go back into the royals to go get these resources, so the royals always maintain a relevance. And I was just like, for the first time since that mechanism was in, I almost feel like it's now unnecessary, because the problem isn't that people are in the black zones too much and there's no connection to the royals. The problem feels very much like people are stuck in the royals and not going to the black zones. And like, that's where I want to make the push. And when he said, I feel limited because I can't gather stuff in the black zones, and I'm like, buddy, just level 1 tool to T5 and go to the red zone, please, man, please. And please go to the red zone. You can see how many enemies are there. It's better than the black zone. You'll be safer.
Yeah. Maybe we can have like a follow-up interview with Cable, like in 3 months or something.
He wants a follow-up. I told him I would do one in 6 months. He wants one in in less, and I'm willing to do that with him because I want to know what happens. But here's my fear. I fear that somebody who spends a week in the blue zone, they're not going to keep playing. Like, I feel like I'm going to go do a checkup on this guy, and he's going to be like, yeah, it just never happened. And that will sadden me. And I feel like the reason would be too much time in the blue zones.
Or he just developed a very solid foundation. He can try all the things he figured out because of try and error, all the things he really likes about in terms of character development. Then he chooses 2 different roles, makes it through the yellows into the reds, finds a great guild, becomes the new, I don't know, dude who does all that one thing. And my example runs out, but you know what I mean. Maybe it's
maybe he does. Maybe he excels, and we will hear a great story. Like, I'm gonna go back to one of the great stories I heard of. There was just this guy. He had started up a guild of 4 friends. It grew to about 7 players, and then one of those 7 players was just hanging out in the black zone and saw a tower that had been unfed, and he claimed it. 3 months later, they had an empire, because Syndic was able to grow an empire out of 1 tower in 7 months. It's you never know. He could be the next guy to own 3 continents. Who knows? Who knows? It's the great part of Albion.
I think we're a little over time.
We're a lot over time. This is an interesting topic. It's a light topic. It doesn't have a lot of good answers. It's just a lot of questions, really, and no solid answers. But it's an interesting topic to me, and I'm hoping, and I feel like I got a lot of information from the players, here in chat, and they had a lot of feelings on it. And some people really feel like the Crossroads fulfill a good role, others don't. But it does seem like everybody can say it'd be good to see more people get involved in PvP. So we're gonna go away for, I guess, like 2 minutes. We're gonna come back with overtime. So I'll do the end of the show rundown here. You can catch us Monday through Friday, 18 UTC, twitch.tv/Albion Online, and later on SoundCloud and youtube.com/AlbionTV. And then Tuesday through Thursday, most Tuesday through Thursdays anyway, we do Albion Live. We're at 19 and 20 UTC. We do live GVGs with conversation and highlights in between. So thank you guys for tuning in. And until next time, Bogul, you have anything to say?
See you in a few minutes for overtime, and then at 19 today with Tazik.
Yeah.
Bye.
Sounds good. All right. Stay classy, Albion.